I'm Jessica Paris from the Alaska Department of Education and Early Development, and I'm honored to introduce our presenter. Dr. Marybeth Flachbert provides technical assistance to schools, districts, and states to build capacity for literacy and school improvement. Marybeth is the lead author of the brand new Alaska Reading Playbook. And additionally, she has provided support to state education agencies throughout the Northwest. She has worked with educators in Alaska, California, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Oklahoma, Oregon, and Texas. Marybeth served as president and chief executive officer of Newhouse Education Center in Houston, Texas, which is a nonprofit think tank for literacy solutions. She has served as deputy superintendent of student achievement and student improvement at the Idaho State Department of Education. She's taught at Boise State University and directed Idaho's Reading First program. Previously, she taught in the Houston Independent and Deer Park Independent School Districts, where her classroom experience included 10 years of both general and special education. In addition to reading, her research interests include systemic educational reform, digital literacy, and language acquisition. Marybeth holds a doctorate in education in curriculum and instruction from Boise State University and an MS in special education from Fairfield University. She is a certified academic language therapist and a dyslexia specialist. We are so honored and excited to have you here today. Thank you, Marybeth.
Thank you, Jessica. You know, the bio always is a little scary because it sounds like I should know something, but we were just giggling before, which is every time I think I know how to teach all kids to read, one of you will come up with a kid where I'll say, I don't know. So I prefer to think that of expertise as opposed to experts because I learn as much from all of the educators I get to work with. So I'm going to turn it over to my good buddy and colleague, Amy Jo, for a quick minute.
Hi, I'm Amy Jo Miners, and I work at the Region 16 Comprehensive Center, which is one of 19 regional centers sponsored by the U.S. Department of Education. And we work to support the state agencies of Alaska, Oregon, and Washington. I've dropped a link in the chat if you would like to learn a little bit more about us. And we have several different projects here specifically in Alaska that we've worked on, commissioned by Commissioner Johnson. And anything from school improvement to increasing literacy. You'll hear more from Marybeth about Alaska's Reading Playbook, which we are close to publication on. We also are beginning to host a series with the department and NWEA on assessment and data literacy. It will be available for credit. I've dropped the aklearns.org link in, and you will find more information about that course and those sessions offered if you're interested at aklearns.org. But Marybeth, I'm excited to hear about Alaska's Reading Playbook.
Thank you, Amy Jo. Thank you. Okay, so let's kind of go over what my goals are, or I always like to have a plan and then we can adjust as necessary. But first thing is you deal with a wide variety of children and all of that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the nature of reading disabilities, why some kids struggle and what could be the area, and more importantly, what can you do about it? So that's where this is sort of like a trailer. Alaska's Reading Playbook is so close to being done, but we're going to pull 5 of the strategies that we think work well from the playbook, so they are all right there and you'll find them, but we'll go over 5 today that would be helpful in an after-school situation. We also hope that we get to know each other a little bit, and one of my goals always is to have fun. Oh, just a slight housekeeping. I really prefer Marybeth as opposed to Dr. Flachbert. That always sounds a little, so anyway, Marybeth or hey you or whatever. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along. We kind of have a nice sized group, but stop me anytime. And yeah, let's get started. So you're from all over. This is a virtual conference. If you would, in the chat box, just tell us where you're from. I'd love to know. I'm, by the way, coming to you from Boise, Idaho. So let us know where you're from. Pull up the chat so we can all see. Palmer, Alaska. Great.
All right, Metlakatla, close.
Juneau, Kenai, Anchorage, the Council of Alaska and Fairbanks, and live in North Pole. That is so exciting. So I may have to send you some things so that I could get you to mail them with a postmark from the North Pole for grandchildren. 9 years now. Oh, that's great. That's great. So awesome. It's really nice to have kind of a wide representation. Alaska just fascinates me. I've had the opportunity to work with educators in Alaska for about 5 or 6 years. And honestly, many of the states I work in, obviously Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, all have rural areas. You guys give a whole new definition to rural, right? It's not rural so much as remote. So just really exciting. Okay, so getting to know each other a little bit. I also, this session is being recorded. The very first slide has my email address on it. Feel free to email me any questions, or you can reach out to Amy Jo. Phone call would also work, but between time differences and your very busy lives, we might not be able to connect. But if you send me an email, I promise to get back to you within 24 hours. Happy to take any questions. Okay, so here's the first get to know you. Now, I will say this. My mother had many fine qualities. Cooking was not one of them. And so she had this favorite, it was just awful casserole. So I couldn't find a picture that represented the exact color gray that my mother's green bean casserole would come in. And she said it was a green bean casserole, but honestly, it would be hard pressed to find a green bean. And so it was these canned somethings, and then this heavy sort of yucky cheese, and then for no good reason, crushed fried onions on top. And all of us would just push it around our plate, try to feed the dog who wised up. So I'm sure if you make that casserole, you do a fine job. My experience was not. So I would just love to know, you know, Thanksgiving is next week. It'll be a great time for family and friends. But what is your least favorite Thanksgiving dish? You can either unmute yourself and tell us because you have a small group, or you can put it in the chat box. What's your least favorite? Yams. Oh, 2 yam yuckers. Okay. Cranberry, cranberry from the can. Turkey, anything pumpkin. Turkey legs. Yams are not popular. Oh gosh, sweet potatoes with marshmallows. That was another one of our holiday favorites. Cranberry sauce. So yeah, there's a lot of wonderful food, but also, and then regardless, somehow it becomes tradition and you get yams or those awful sweet potatoes. So anyway, good. I hope you have a wonderful holiday celebration if I forget to remind you. All right, we're going to get a little serious for a second. Not too serious. So this infographic is very, very common in any kind of reading research that you will see. It's called Scarborough's Rope, named after the author, Hollis Scarborough. She created this visual in 2001. And the reason you see the $50 up there is if ever you have the opportunity or we get to be in another session together, you can make a quick $50 by betting whoever you're with that I'm going to bring up Scarborough's Rope. I'll give you a hint. Rosie Santana, who also does a lot of work with me and with Amy Jo, she's going to do it too. As a matter of fact, we were thinking about getting our first tattoos of Scarborough's Rope. But it's a great graphic to describe the very complicated process of learning to read. Speaking and listening are innate skills. Reading and writing are not. They are very much learned. Some of us seem to learn so easily that it appears effortless, but for about a third of our students, learning to read will be the hardest thing they do in school. And the reason it's so difficult is there are so many neurological processes happening at the same time, which is why I really like this visual of the rope. The two big buckets or areas that skilled reading is a result of is first language comprehension, and then the other is word recognition. So when we think of language comprehension, that's the top of the rope. And over time, we get increasingly strategic, and we want our students to be able to pick which skill they need. It's dependent on background knowledge, facts, concepts, an understanding. Vocabulary plays a critical piece in comprehension. In fact, the two have a correlation of about 80%. So kids who are good readers learn more vocabulary, and vocabulary helps you comprehend whatever you're reading. But if we think of vocabulary as the bricks, language structure, grammar, syntax, that's the mortar that holds that wall together. So an understanding of the semantics, academic language often has a different sort of sentence structure. Text versus speech are often very different. We speak much more informally, but we, in text, especially school text, academic text, the sentence structure is often more complicated. The other, it requires verbal reasoning to draw inference, to make metaphors, and then literacy knowledge. Do they understand text structure, the difference between informational text and narrative text, things that tell a story? So that's the top half of the rope. The bottom half of the rope is word recognition, and that is dependent on something called phonological awareness, the awareness of sounds in words. Decoding, which is a fancy word for phonics, so that English has an alphabetic principle. So there are 44 sounds or phonemes in English, and they map to 26 letters. And then sight recognition. When you are reading, you read so quickly that you're not aware that you're actually looking at every letter. Your brain is. You're attaching a sound to it. You're doing that all in sequence, and then you attach meaning, which is why you can read house versus horse, and you don't confuse the two, because you see the difference in that letter in the middle of a word. The challenge is, for those of us who are skilled readers, this process happens so quickly. For our young learners, our goal is to make this increasingly automatic or easier, and this increasingly strategic, so that kiddos know which skill they need as they're moving along. So that's the big picture. And regardless of how easy or difficult it is, that's the process everybody goes through. But if you think of your students, the ones you work with, they're probably going to fall into one of four quadrants, and that's referred to as the simple view of reading. So our first quadrant are kiddos who have adequate language, that language comprehension, and adequate decoding. In order for us to have reading comprehension, we need both that decoding, that phonics piece, and language comprehension. Those kids, our job is to motivate and keep them reading. But then we have another group of students, and I want to hear more about the children you work with in your after-school programs, who may have an easy time with decoding. They understand phonics, but they have a low language. It could also be English learners or just low language, but they struggle with reading because of language issues, vocabulary, background information. We have a third group, which would be, you heard in the introduction, I'm a dyslexia specialist. The typical profile for a dyslexia student is a student who has adequate language, adequate intelligence. Their issue is related to decoding. They have a really hard time with phonological awareness, hearing a sound and mapping that to letters. And then we have a group of students where it's a double deficit. Not only do they have low language, but they also struggle with decoding. So our students can fall in any of those categories. What I'd like you to talk about and let me know is, where do your students struggle? You can unmute yourself and just tell us, or you can put it in the chat box. where do most of the kids struggle, or do you have a totally mixed bag? So feel free to unmute yourself and just talk about the kiddos you work with in your after-school program. So, okay, great. So you have a lot of 3 and 4, some 2, some 1. Issues with the phonological awareness and the young ones you work with, yeah, that's often a deficit. Mixed bag, but many 1 and 2. All right, that's great. Anybody else? 3 and 4 and some 1 and 2. Yeah, in your after-school program, I mean, they all come, and you need to try to figure out how to help them. So it's great. The challenge that we have, though, is it's helpful to know what they struggle with, because then we can kind of target if you do any kind of tutorial or just language experiences after school. For example, if they are fine, they're doing fine, they have adequate language comprehension and adequate decoding, they're going to progress through the stages of reading pretty easily. We want to monitor their progress, check in with them, build a relationship, and as much as possible, how do we encourage and motivate them to read as much as they can? It's one of those things, the rich get richer. If we can find an area of interest, if we can encourage them to read, wide reading is really a key to academic advancement. But those kids need to be motivated and encouraged. These kids, the kids with low language, we really need to work on building their vocabulary and their language. So often when kids struggle, we give them more worksheets or decoding. What you can do most, which would be really effective, is to have them talk to you, have them always speak in full sentences. And when you do that, you can give them a sentence starter. So they give you whatever language they have, and you model back the way to put that in a full sentence. We'll talk more about how to build language. But we want to provide research-based interventions. By the way, speaking in complete sentences is a research bent. And again, we want to monitor their progress. Then we have another group of students that lack word recognition. For them, what they're getting in school probably may not be enough. They need additional help, which they may be getting in school. But in after school, we could really be working on the word or even the phonemic awareness activities. All of the strategies that we pick are very engaging. They can be done after school. And again, they need intervention. They simply need more practice. So after school is a great time to get it. And then the last one, these kiddos, the core curriculum is not enough. They may get support in school, and that's wonderful. Boy, if they could get more support to reading aloud 20 minutes a day, it's a fabulous research base. So we really need to have as many opportunities for learning as they can, and we do want to see how they're doing in school. Okay, so I'm going to be quiet for a second because I just talked at you a lot. But we are going to talk about all of that is the what's going on for the kids, but that's kind of the what's going on and the so what. We want to talk about the now what. So Alaska's Reading Playbook, which we're so excited about, it's how Amy, Jo, and I spent our summer vacation, but it was written for Alaskan educators. And the reason is because while there is so much research on reading, we know more about reading than all other content areas combined. To be honest, the research around working with Native students, particularly Native Alaskans, is very, very small. So we recognized that we wanted to pull from that rich oral tradition, rich cultural heritage, and infuse the science of reading, so evidence-based practices. Every strategy that's in the playbook comes with a video that shows you exactly how to do that. So there are tons of resources. Every section has a little bit on the research, why it's important, and then goes right into how to teach it. So it's organized by concept of phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And the strategies recognize or go from early childhood, I would say about pre-K to 5th grade. So it spans the elementary kind of thing. Yes, great thanks to Joel, who added a lot on the native cultural. Amy Jo, is there anything else you'd like to add about the playbook?
No, I think I really appreciate all of the teachers who throughout the process from May till October shared reviews of the research, reread Marybeth's work after she had compiled a lot of the research, and then really took a look at it in terms of their practice in Alaskan schools and what that looks like. So hopefully the strategies are ones that you can take and use in after-school programs or in the day programs as well, and hopefully some support for families as well.
Thank you, Amy Jo. Okay, so the very first section is phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is an umbrella term for all types of skills that have to do with being understanding the sounds of words in language. It starts at a very basic level of being able to count words in a sentence. Have you ever had the experience of listening to folks speaking a language that you don't understand? It's almost like you don't know where one word ends and another begins. It just kind of sounds like one syllable or sound after another. Counting words in a sentence is actually teaching kids word boundaries, that words have boundaries. It can be done very, very easily. You can just say a sentence, have the kids say it back to you, and begin to count. Once we understand word boundaries, then we want students to understand about syllables. So we can do that easily with like compound words, playground, playground. Rhyming, which is step 3, is really, really very important. I don't know if you've tried to teach rhyming, but the best way to do it is modeling. It's pretty hard to say to a 4 or 5-year-old, okay, we're going to delete the initial phoneme and then the rest of the phonogram stays the same. I mean, they don't get it. Now, Cat in the Hat or whatever, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Wall, fall, they rhyme. We need to teach students about rhyming. Rhyming is a big deal in English because if you can spell sick, you can spell lick, you can spell tick, you can spell pick. So it's teaching them that word family. So rhyming is a critical skill for subsequent reading achievement. Those are the early ones. Phoneme or phonemic awareness, the awareness of the sounds in words, is a more advanced skill. And there we want kids to be able to isolate, identify, and categorize. What's the difference between a vowel? A vowel opens your mouth, a consonant closes your mouth. And we also want them to be able to blend like pop, pop. Blend words together as well take them apart. Cap, app. Again, that gets into that sound symbol. We're teaching them phonics. And then more advanced skills, which would be deletion, addition, and substitution. For kiddos who are struggling with reading, they benefit from that for a long time. The interesting thing about phonological awareness is it's all sounds. It's all sounds. It doesn't have to do with worksheets or anything like that. But we find with kiddos, so again, it really lends itself to an after-school environment. The best way to teach it is to make it kinesthetic. This teacher is working with a group of 5- and 6-year-olds, and you notice she has these magnets on the whiteboard. They are going to move one magnet for every word in the sentence. In that sense, and it's always watch me. We use the model of I do, we do, you do. So the instructor is the first one, then they do it together with the students, and then the students do it on their own. You can put tiles. You can do fingers, like the boy ran down the street. The boy ran down the street. How many words? 6. You can use hands. I really like the chopping. I think that helps kids with segmenting. It also helps them with blending. You can use tambourines. I was in a kindergarten earlier this week, and the teacher had them each had a tambourine. It was a little noisy, but it was a lot of fun for the students. Even mittens. So if they're starting out with like consonant, vowel, consonant, easy words like pit, it. So as much as possible, make it kinesthetic. So there was a question about schools using ECRI. That's from the University of Oregon, isn't it? Could you unmute yourself and just talk a little bit about ECRI and how you use it?
Yeah, I 5th grade during their school day, so I don't use it as much, but it's something that my school's been using, my school district in Northwest Arctic has been using for a few years. And it's part of a teacher routine that uses finger cues to identify letters and sounds and blends, and it can even be used for suffixes or those other affixes and kind of derivations that come along. And it's something I want to get stronger in, just because in just 2 years I'm going to have who will have started this in 2nd grade, and I want to be able to kind of continue, maybe not the full routine in 5th grade, but I want to be able to at least incorporate elements of them as we start to tackle bigger word parts and elements of meaning.
Great. I'm going to put a link in. And by the way, I don't work for any publishers. There is, and I have it on my lap, there is a program that's relatively inexpensive and only needs to the book. So whether you use it, and it's used widely in Alaska. But what I love about it is if you look up Hegarty on YouTube, you'll see all the hand motions. By the way, what you just talked about and having that, putting those pieces in and things like that, all of that is in the Alaska's Reading Playbook. There is like 24 pages of not just text. Here's the link, here's how you do it, and here's how you describe it. I really like the idea that you work with 5th grade students and that you're thinking about doing it with them. The most recent research says for struggling older students, the issue is still phonological awareness. And what they need oftentimes is advanced. So for example, if the word was manipulate and they tried to spell that, if they start with the and they start to do it line by line, word letter by letter, they're never going to get there. But if we can teach them manipulate and break it down by the syllables, they're much more likely to be able to spell it. So great question. Thank you. The next one that we thought would work really well, so that was the phonological. Obviously, in every section, there are between 5 and 10 instructional strategies. All of them have the how to do it. But this one I thought might be really work well in an after-school situation. It's called a blending wheel. So in the inner circle, as you'll see, they put just some consonants. And then in the middle circle, you have vowels and vowel pairs. And then on the final edge circle, there are more consonants, and the kids move the circles and they make new words. Again, I think for a lot of weak readers, they try to memorize. And what we really want them to see is if you just change a letter, either in the initial, beginning, middle, or end, you can make a whole new word. So it's fun, it's engaging, low cost, and it might be also fun in a game format or a different way to practice words than they've seen before. So we have phonological awareness, make it kinesthetic, phonics, make it fun. There isn't any research to really support the value of doing worksheets, but if you have to use worksheets, at least give them a vis-a-vis or some kind of marker where they can write it and take it off, or a whiteboard, because kids like to play teacher, right? Fluency is the next piece. For a lot of our students, it's not just, they need opportunities to read and reread. One of the best activities, just best activities that you can do in an after-school program is to have the children read aloud to somebody. The research is overwhelming about the value of having kiddos read between 10 and 20 minutes aloud to someone, to an adult. It's more powerful than anything else. It would be wonderful if teachers could listen to every child read every day. Unfortunately, that is often very difficult, but in after-school programs, just having the kids sit down and read with a caring adult or an older child is wonderful. They can do partner reads. You read a page, they read a page, or one activity that's really fun is reader's theater. So you see in the picture, and they made a big deal, they had parents come, but you can use any kind of passage you want. Children each have a part, and just like actors, they need to practice their part until it sounds like they're speaking to somebody. And the challenge with reading is it's almost like learning to play the piano or anything else, scales, they need practice. So rereading the same information is actually really great. It should sound like they're speaking and then have the opportunity to perform it for someone else. They could perform it for one other person. They could perform it for 3 other people, but it's the opportunity, it kind of gives them reading with a purpose. And so anytime you can turn any kind of passage into a little bit of dramatic play, it's great. Very, very helpful. Another area, yeah, that is a great idea to have community members volunteer. Kids love to, they just love to perform. So over and over again, fluency practice, readers, theaters, read with a partner, all of those things are great. And then this is actually a picture of a very famous, and she is Dr. Archer, Dr. Anita Archer. And I've given you the YouTube link. She is a master at teaching vocabulary, just a master. And the strategy that she uses most frequently is one called fast mapping. In the vocabulary section of the playbook, there are strategies for teaching really young kids all the way up to teaching morphemes. What I didn't know, and Joel Isaac was so helpful at the Department of Ed, is how many of the native Alaskan languages are morphemic, meaning that they have lots of prefixes and suffixes, and that changes the word. So the vocabulary section of the playbook has many strategies. This is just one, but I think it might work well in your current situation. So for fast mapping, the real idea is we want kiddos to have between 12 and 14 exposures to the word, where they're either saying the word, they're hearing the word, they're associating meaning. So we say the word, we have the students repeat the word, we give a student-friendly definition, we give an example, we allow them to talk to a neighbor. Kids learn most from each other. Interestingly, you also give them a non-example, so they're learning more about the word in context. We break the word apart, so we do a little bit of phonological awareness, and then the teacher and student say the word again. So for this one, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself so I can hear you, okay? We'll get ready. Could be a little crazy with the delay, but it'll be fun. I promise. I'm going to demonstrate fast mapping. You ready? You unmuted?
I get everybody
okay.
to unmute.
Chaos. All right, we'll make Holly nervous. All right. The word is summarize. What's the word?
Summarize.
Summarize.
Good. Say it again. The word is summarize.
Summarize.
Terrific. To summarize is to say the most important facts about something. You keep it short and clear. So for example, if I were going to summarize what we did during reading instruction today, I would say we learned new vocabulary words, we learned to spell words with the sound, and then you each had time to read your own book. Short and sweet. So to summarize is to say just the important facts. All right, if you were in a teaching situation, but you don't have to, I want you to say the word one more time. What's the word?
Summarize.
All right, turn and talk to your neighbor, which you can't really do because that would cause even more. But then you would ask students to tell each other what the definition is. Okay. If I went on and I told you each word we wrote on the board and each spelling and exactly what book each of you were reading, and I listed all the vocabulary words, would I have summarized what we did this morning?
No.
Good. Yeah, to summarize, you stick to the facts. What's the word again?
Summarize.
And it means short and sweet, right? You stick to the facts. Okay, let's count the number of syllables in summarize. Ready? The word is
Summarize.
Summarize. Good. How many syllables are in summarize?
3.
And it means
Short and
and sweet.
short and sweet.
facts.
Stick to the facts, ma'am, right? There you go. All right. Great example. There are more examples like that, and you can watch Anita Archer doing it, and Amy Joseph put it in our chat box, but there are more strategies like that. How many times do you think you said the word summarize in 90 seconds?
A lot.
A lot. And that's why it's called fast mapping. The only thing that's a little bit different about it, but I really like it, is the idea that you give a non-example. So often we just give examples, but we also want to start teaching about the words in context, right? So you give a non-example, and that's making it also metacognitive. So we have the kids stay engaged with us. Is that something you think you could do in your program?
Yeah. Is it buffering or is nobody saying anything?
You can do it with any word. The trick is have the students say the word as much as possible, give a student-friendly definition, an example, an opportunity for them to talk to somebody else. If you can, do that phonological awareness, and we make sure they really get a chance to interact, and they say the word one more time. So 12 to 14 meaningful interactions. Okay. Now, all the rest of this stuff, phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, the point of reading is for comprehension. There's a lot of research about what makes comprehension effective. One is, we talked a little bit about kinesthetic or touching things. We want to make comprehension as interactive as possible. I love seeing the idea that the students ended up writing their own play and performing it as part of their reader's theater. That's making it interactive, right? The students are engaged. They're interacting with the text, they're interacting with each other, they're interacting with their audience. We want to make it as interactive as possible. Teach kids to use Post-it notes, highlighters. If they're reading, even if it's digital, can they press, most programs, Kindles and all that, you can do it. If they're listening to books on audio, stop, answer questions, talk to somebody. But we want to teach kids that comprehension is an interactive process. Most effective strategies are cooperative. Children learn a lot from each other. And so it could be that one child reads a part of a passage, the next child reads the next part of the passage, the third child, and they come together and create meaning. That's called jigsaw. It could be that one partner reads a page, the other partner reads a page, but we want them to have that experience that it's shared. Graphic organizers, anytime they read something, if you could just have them even do something as simple as a Venn diagram, what's the same, what's different, that's compare and contrast, very, very important. Questioning, so the student's ability to ask and answer questions, and last but not least, summarization. A very, very successful strategy for teaching comprehension is a retell. So after the students read something, you have them retell you or another child in the program the story. That you don't often see that on state assessments, only because we don't have the ability yet to be able to capture that. But if the child can retell you what they read, we know they've comprehended it. And one of the areas that I think we can make really more interactive is this idea of questioning. Oftentimes we ask the kids a lot of questions, but a higher level skill is the ability to generate questions. It's also more interactive. So a group called the Right Question Institute came up with this protocol, and the idea is that students generate questions based on a statement. So the rules are pretty simple. They can ask as many questions as you can, that they don't stop to ask questions, judge, or answer questions. So you as the instructor need to be careful that you're not going to ask them questions. We're not going to judge. We're going to write it down exactly as it was asked, same as it's stated, and that we teach students to turn statements into questions. So that's the protocol. Ask as many questions as you can. Don't stop to judge or answer questions. Write each question exactly as it's asked, and then we turn all statements into questions. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a statement, and then I'm going to give you 3 minutes to generate as many questions as you want, and you're going to write them in the chat box. This question asking generating technique you could use before they read something or after they read something to see how well they comprehended it. You could also do it like after they've read some of the book, but not all of it, or some of the story, but not all of it. But it's that idea that you're teaching them metacognition, that not only are they reading what's on the page, but they're reading beyond the page. Okay? So I'm going to give you a statement. I'm going to put on my timer. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to write as many questions as you can in the chat box. Are you ready? Thumbs up if you're ready. Okay. Here's your statement. Humpback whales travel 31,000 miles during migration. Okay. So in 3 minutes, we can scroll the chat box and see how many questions were generated in just 3 minutes. So really, really amazing. You know, a question came up. So I'm going to stop my sharing for just a second so I can see you because I want to talk more about this. A question came up about what's the right age and you know, when can they start asking questions? You know, little people are in just like sponges for information. They are so curious. I've been fortunate enough and had a bit of a strange that I've worked with 3-year-olds all the way to graduate school. And some of my 3-year-olds were the most creative. I think sometimes we sort of take that out of them. I don't mean to be unkind or criticize us as a profession, but kids are naturally inquisitive. Why this? Why that? Why mommy? I mean, my son is now 30. He still says, why mommy? But I think we want to encourage that and foster that questioning. So I would open that up as, how good are your kids at asking questions? I think too often we ask them questions when what we really want to do is spark that learning, have them create their own questions. So let's just talk about that a little bit.
I think it really makes a difference if students feel safe and comfortable in the environment and with the adults to ask questions. But I think sometimes working with students who believe that the teacher is the all-knowing, all-powerful, and that their job as a student is to find the right answer, they're less willing to take that risk and ask questions. But if it's a safe area where they can have those conversations, then yeah, encouraging the curiosity, I think we can do a lot to teach curiosity and encourage that in students.
Thank you, Amy Jo. I think it was our friends from Nome, BGC, who put in there what age are they developmentally staged so they understand how to ask questions and what questions are. Tell us about the kiddos you work with.
So yeah, my name's Bev and I'm in Nome, and it's not that they ask plenty of questions. Every day there's questions left and right, but when we're asking them, giving them directions, ask us questions, we get statements. When we ask for statements, we get questions. Kids were like, so what did you eat for breakfast today? The porcupine is outside. Like, they don't connect a lot of the things to what's going on. And I guess that's more of like, with this whale, I'm sure they'd be like, oh, humpback whales are gray. Like, they know a lot about humpback whales and they just want to share that information instead of asking the questions. And so how do we direct that?
Yeah, I think that would be, that's a great teaching opportunity. Yes, humpback whales are gray. How can we make that a question? Might want to say, what color are humpback whales? So I think what we do, and this is really kind of open-ended or very organic, is whatever they give us, we model back how to make it a question. So humpback whales travel 31,000 miles during migration. That's the statement. What would the question be? How many miles do humpback whales travel, right? So we're constantly modeling, because I think that's a great point that they need to be taught the difference between a question and an answer, and also what's a statement and what's a question. So great, I love that. I love that you asked that question, and I love that you're trying to teach the kids that. But I think we give them whatever language they give us, and we give it back to them in the form of a question. What I noticed is that it was going really fast in the beginning, and then it started to slow down. So it was literally, I cheated, it was only 2 minutes and 45 seconds. But did you notice that in the beginning it was a lot easier? But interestingly, the quality of your questions, or how interesting your questions were, became more sophisticated with longer time. Does that make sense? If we look back at all the questions, they became, Jessica, I just loved how long can a person live in a whale? unmute yourself. Talk to me a little bit about this strategy of just having the kids generate questions, or how did it feel to you? You can unmute yourself or put your answer in the chat box, but if you want to unmute yourself, we're a nice, small enough group. Well, it is one of many, it's just one of many strategies for teaching comprehension. It's really powerful, and I hope you share it. The idea is that rather than just being able to answer the questions that are posed to them, that they generate questions. There were two researchers, Hart and Risley, that did a study of language, and I'm not sure the socioeconomic status of most of your students, but what they found is children living in affluent families were more encouraged to ask questions than children who lived in working class families or families living at or below the poverty line. That children who live at or below the poverty line, unfortunately, will more likely hear 5 limits on behavior to every 1 question or inquiry. So we really want to make that time, I love that expression, amplify. We want to amplify that safety that Amy Jo was talking about, but also the learning experience, that this is a place where they can explore and learn and be creative. So in school, they'll probably have a lot of, this is the right answer, but maybe with you, you can expand that knowledge and that learning to be a little bit more organic and a little bit more broader. But that statistic for me was really disturbing, because I found many of my students, I've always worked with high percentages of high-risk kiddos, were not questioners, when in fact, we need them to have that curiosity. The other thing that I think is really great for any learning session or experience, we want, again, with the questioning, but we're also teaching them metacognition, is that idea of using exit tickets with their students. So before they leave for the day, tell me one thing you learned, or tell me one thing you failed at, or what did you struggle with, and how did you do it? Anything that gets them to think about the experience, think about whatever tutoring session, maybe it was something to do with athletics, whatever, but something that teaches them that sort of closure for the day and gives you information about how they're doing. So I am a big believer in exit tickets, and it's what would be called a summative activity, but it gives you information and it lets you know what the students, if anything, got out of it. So I'm giving you an exit ticket, and then we're going to have lots of time to conversation. But what I'd love to know is, in the chat box, can you tell me if there is one strategy you'll be able to use with your students? That's your exit ticket. Tell me one strategy you'll be able to share with your students. See if I can get my mouse to work here. So direct and honest. I love that. Not making, how do we get them? Teach what words, question begin with what color, how many things. I wanted to, wanted to read what everyone else is asking. I was thinking that too. I got a lot of questions by my curiosity.
Jessica, I think that's really true, is being able to take these strategies and apply it into those the content rich, the STEM lessons, the how can you increase vocabulary, how can you work on student fluency through all of the other engaging activities that you have going on in your programs.
Right. I think sometimes we think literacy is only taught in specific things when, I mean, hopefully I made a good enough case for vocabulary and language. If students just get broad learning experiences, you're building their background knowledge, you're building their curiosity, you're building their vocabulary, you're building their language. If we could speak to students in full sentences, if we can model academic language, oh my goodness, you would be doing so much for the rest of their schooling career. So I like that. I ask a question, I answer with a question to help them size. This is about making decisions. Okay. Well, since we're talking about questions, what questions do you have for me, or what questions do you have for the group? Great.
I have a question. So for part of our day, we try to have some reading time for students. It's the kind of choice time, like you can work on homework or you can read. You talked about the benefit of reading aloud, and I've noticed some of our students read better when they read aloud, and that can also sometimes be a distraction to others around them. So do you have any ways of like structuring reading time to support those who benefit reading aloud without, like, especially when space, we can't necessarily spread too far apart?
Yeah. One is it's sort of how you organize your space. And there was one family that I really just came to know and love, and when the kids were doing silent reading, they had gotten a refrigerator, and they kept the box because they all lived in a pretty small apartment. And if you were reading or doing homework, you got to go in the box. But can you create little spaces within where they can be enclosed and reading to themselves? Because you hit on two really critically important things. If you can read, sustained silent reading, which is what that is so effective in a great way. If you can't read, it's sustained silent faking. So the kids who still do better reading aloud, it's because they are not strong readers yet. So is there a way that you could engineer or organize the environment in such a way so that those kids who can read get to read, but those kids who are what I like to call emerging readers get to read with somebody else and they receive feedback? Because otherwise it's really a waste of their time, because they struggle so much that they're actually not able to attend to the task. And so that can be disruptive and noisy too, because they can't read.
One thing I would add with that, Marybeth, I found in my classroom, we made the phonics phones out of some old PVC pipe. And if you have a student reading into that, it is so loud in their own ear that they automatically reduce their volume and they're much quieter. We called them whisper phones. They would whisper their reading into it, and that helped.
A great strategy, Amy Jo. Plus, it's just fun, right? Reading buddies, a class pet. Yes, my sainted dog, Tex, and my daughter Katie, because she was the youngest. I was kind of done listening, and so she would read to Tex, who would fall asleep, and she would get very irritated with him. But Katie needed to practice reading. I didn't necessarily need to practice sleeping. Grandparents are great, though, to have somebody. I was recently in a school, and they have volunteer grandparents that listen to first graders read. And if you've listened to a first grader read, you can totally understand, the dog sat on a log. And this gentleman was volunteering, and each of the kids would go out and read to him. And this little girl, Becky, went out, and she came right back, and the teacher said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Grandpa's asleep." it was just kind of the kids put them away. But yes, reading to somebody. What other questions do you have?
We would use in Juneau, our Tlingit Cultural Immersion Group had fish camp tents that were pretty small. They were like perfect first grader size. And we would set up a little fish camp tent in the back corner. And one of the things they would get to do is to go read to a buddy in there.
Oh, I love that.
One of the struggles that we face with teaching anything and is different age groups and different levels. Even within all of our third graders, we have third graders who are much closer to kindergarten and some third graders who are much closer to a fifth grader, but they're all technically about the same age. And I guess do you have any tips or anyone have any tips of thinking about when we're doing these activities, making sure we're still engaging those high ones in the beginning with the 4 things, like the ones who are very good, know this stuff, but also getting our 4s and still teaching both of them with the same instruction. We've got one room, one teacher.
Right. So the opportunity then is, the learning target or whatever the objective is the same. What you're going to do is differentiate how they get there. So say you have third graders and they can read and you're making something. They read the instructions, right? They are the ones who are going to read the instructions. But we also want those kids that can't participate as strongly. So their job would be, okay, retell the instructions. We can hold them accountable for that. So we really need to think about how do we differentiate. So we want those kids that have it to keep going, of course, but they can be more independent. You can assign them some independent tasks that they do on their own or with just a buddy, so that you have time to work with the kids who are the most fragile. If there's only one teacher, what we always say is you need to have the most trained person working with the most fragile students. The other students are probably ready for us to scaffold. How do they be a little bit more independent as learners, which is our goal for all students. Oh, I'm sorry, Cecily, you're having a hard time hearing?
I would also make sure that, in my class, my more struggling readers, we would have them practice a favorite story. And then for their rereading, rather than rereading with a peer who is reading years above them, to have them buddy up with a younger student so that they can be a role model for that younger student in how they share their stories. So they still get the opportunity to read aloud, but it's maybe a bit of a safer pairing partner for them to be able to enjoy that experience.
Sometimes and that's a great one, because sometimes our tendency is to put the highest with the lowest, and that's really not fair to either one. We want them to be a little bit closer in terms of if you're going to do paired reading. Okay, so the question was adult-led read aloud. So it's not an either or, it's a both end. They need practice. With fluency, they need practice. It takes a lot of easy reading to make reading easy. They need practice reading aloud so that they just get the practice with the coding and phonics and fluency and phrasing. When we're reading to students, we're building their vocabulary and their comprehension. So you want to do both. Reading aloud can be, and some of the strategies for when you're reading aloud to students is to stop. Do that, like think aloud, I'm wondering, or you can stop after a paragraph or something and then they make a statement, have them generate questions. What do you think is going to come next? What do you think went on before the story? Tell me about the character. What questions do you have? So you want to make it interactive. You can have kids draw pictures while they're being read aloud too. And I know time is so precious, but one, the kids need opportunities to read aloud to someone, and then they also, listening comprehension, our ability to learn through listening, actually far exceeds reading comprehension until about 7th grade. So yes, read aloud to the kids whenever possible. I love that. Give the kids a chance to chime in, right? So that they get to make, they need to participate as much as possible, motions or whatever. But remember, the primary goal with teaching reading comprehension is to make it interactive. So how can you engage them? I love to have somebody read to me, but it also puts me to sleep. So how can we hold them accountable? I love that, changing the end of the story. How would you make it different? That's a great idea. Thank you. And the only way they can do that is if they've understood and they can then add to. Terrific. Act out the story while reading. Another, you guys are so creative. That's why I say I always learn so much. I always learn so much. So hopefully you've gotten something out of our session, but I'm taking some of your great ideas. Don't worry, here's how it works. I give you credit twice, and then it's mine. And feel free to do the same with anything that I've given you. Just say, oh, I learned it at a conference. What? Once? Maybe even just once, and then it gets to be yours, and you'll make it so much better. Are there any other questions? I'm going to put my email up one more time. If you do have questions and you want to reach out to me, please feel free to send me. Also know that Amy Jo can get a hold of me, and as you can tell, she is a wealth of information and teaching experience, so please do that. And I'll stay on for a couple of minutes if anybody has some specific questions. But other than that, I wish you great luck.
I saw someone ask.
Enjoy your holidays.
I saw someone ask when the Alaska's Reading Playbook would be out. And
yes, that's a great question.
That's a good question. We are working in the final editing stages with our copy editor. And so I can tell you that it will be posted on aklearns.org. We hope to have it as a digital resource primarily so that you're able to engage in all of the different videos that come with each of the strategies so you can see in practice what it looks like. It will be available also in a print edition, but of course then you won't have the videos and the examples right there for you.